Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone in the room and those that will join us later virtually via the video. I want to be time on task and welcome you and say, my name is Jennifer Harris, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's session. This is track 4, Public Engagement and Governance Networks. Could someone give me a virtual thumbs up to let me know if my screen is projecting? All right, thank you. So with that, let's get started. Again, Jennifer Harris of the Social Development Commission here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have the great pleasure of having with us Dr. Frederica Washington and Codi Smith to join us this morning, which they will give a robust introduction to themselves once we get started. So to give an overview in our brief welcoming today, centering us on our topic at hand, would love for everyone to just center in on our conference theme, the unmasking of the complexities of identity, place, and space, the public administrator's challenge. In our opening session, hopefully you had the opportunity to begin your ideation and you're here with an open mind to take in today's session. We will introduce our panelists. After the presentations, we ask you to hold your questions. Please don't forget your questions, but hold your questions, and we'll have a question and answer session, as well as the opportunity for some closing comments and offer continued communications. So with that, being time on task, and maybe we should allow just a few more seconds for individuals to join us in the room. They were explaining the instructions on how to get into the room just a moment ago. I see Dr. Amity joined us for just a second.
Hello.
Good morning, Dr. Amity.
How you doing? Good to see
well,
you.
And yourself?
It took me a little while to navigate my way there.
Just said that everybody was making their way to the rooms, but we just did a brief greeting and reviewed the theme for the conference, and welcomed everyone to track 4 for the 11:15 session.
Great. Good to see you, Jennifer.
Good seeing you too. And I see the rest of our panel has joined us, Dr. Washington, and I believe I saw Codi Smith as well. All right, so upon your readiness, Dr. Washington, would you like to introduce yourself and to begin your presentation?
Can you hear me? Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
I'm going to share my screen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Federickia Washington. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Public Administration at Tennessee State University. And please let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, good job. It's always a bit different with the virtual conferences. So I just ask that you guys bear with me. Again, I'm Dr. Federickia Washington. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone. I would like to share my research with you, examining activities and collaborative governance arrangements for homeless emergency discharge planning. And so a bit of background about the study. Okay. So a bit of background about the study. Recent changes in homeless policies have focused on collaborative efforts at the local level, which means that there are mandates that are used to encourage continuum of care networks to address these issues within the local levels and to work with diverse service providers for the various issues that homeless individuals face. What's interesting is while some organizations are mandated to participate, other organizations participate solely based on organizational interest. They have a stake in the issue and they would like to be a part of the solution. Under the HEARTH Act of 2009, the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act, continuum of care networks were created to address homelessness at the local level, as I mentioned. Here we see continuum of care networks really come into play. They're emphasized and highlighted with their roles and responsibilities. The emergency discharge coordination policy requires continuums of care networks to implement a plan that allows them to place homeless individuals in a safe shelter at night, rather than placing them back onto the streets into homelessness once they exit a public institution such as jails, mental health institutions, or hospitals. So why is coordination important? As I mentioned, coordination is important because homeless individuals have various issues that they're facing. It's just not a housing crisis, that's the problem. And research has found that homeless individuals experience higher rates of hospitalization, they have extended hospital stays, and frequent visits to the emergency room. What that means is that it leads to the inappropriate use of hospital emergency rooms, duplication of services, and a cycle of them being ping-ponged back and forth from system to system without an actual wraparound plan that gets at the issue, which leads to unmet policy objectives and increased costs for both hospitals and shelters. And so what we believe can help this is a proper coordination and wraparound service that can address each need and a plan that says this is where you go once you exit, this is who you need to speak with, because there's just not one size fits all model that can get at this and help to alleviate this issue. This brings me to the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study is to identify the different actors and their roles in the emergency discharge coordination process. We want to know the actors because, as I've mentioned, not everyone is mandated to participate because not everyone receives HUD or federal funding. Two, to identify different activities during the emergency discharge planning coordination process. We know that over a period of time, there are different activities that present themselves. There are different factors that may hinder the coordination process. And I just would like to understand better what those activities and factors are. And three, to understand how these activities affect the emergency discharge planning process. When you have different stakeholders from various sectors, there may be some challenges along the way. We would like to know how those challenges are resolved, what success factors, because there are a number of success factors in the literature when you talk about coordinating under policy systems. And so a better understanding of that will help to coordinate this process of emergency discharge planning. Research questions guiding my study include: who are the key actors and what are their roles in emergency discharge planning process? Also, what are the activities that are occurring in the collaborative process at different stages? By answering these research questions, contributions of the studies will allow us to infer about different stages of collaborative governance and policy settings, and provide improved practices for public and nonprofit leaders by identifying challenges and success factors that can lead to successful coordination of practices. We know that collaboration isn't a linear process where you have members that come at different stages, members that leave at different times. And so that can impact collaboration, which ultimately would have a say at policy for setting these agendas. And so helping us to better understand that process will help us to hopefully alleviate and combat some of these issues that our homeless community face. Theoretical foundations that underpin my study include collaborative governance and life cycle of collaboration. We know that collaborative governance is not a linear process, but it evolves and it changes. It takes on different structures over time. We know that there are different leaders at different times, different groups or individuals step up at different times. So we would like to see what that looks like. We know that life cycle, it captures the complexities of collaborations and provides an understanding of the collaborative phases. And so being able to say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, this is what it looks like. And hopefully by being able to channel and identify some of those key activities at different stages will allow these organizations to move further along in the process with as few hiccups as possible, because we know that collaboration works until it doesn't. So my research design data and methods for this study specifically, I conducted a qualitative case study. My data was collected using semi-structured interviews. I used a modified thematic analysis by Braun and Clark, and utilized in vivo 12 to help capture some of those key themes and findings. My study is a comparative case study of 3 cases in Texas. Dallas had 3 participants, Fort Worth, 4 participants, and Houston had 3 participants. And these 3 specific cases were selected based on their large numbers of homeless individuals and a large number of service providers within these networks to care for and cater to these homeless individuals. Also, supplemental descriptive analyses were conducted with HUD homeless data, which allowed me to see the percentages of mentally ill individuals, individuals with chronic substance use, and just families and single individuals, because we know that that's important when we talk about wraparound services for homeless individuals. Stakeholders engaged in emergency discharge planning coordination process. There were 3 main providers. There were COCs, there were hospitals and medical service providers, and there were shelters. And for my cases, we found that Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance was the head COC, Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, and Houston Coalition for the Homeless. Those entities all report to HUD, and that is the main contact when we talk about trying to rally and identify stakeholders to engage and bring to these networks. Next, we have hospitals and medical service providers, which Parkland Hospital, John Peter Smith True Worth Medical Home, and Healthcare for the Homeless. Also for the shelters, we have the Bridge Homeless Recovery Center, True Worth, and Presbyterian Night Shelter and Harmony House. So a collaboration life cycle of emergency discharge coordination, as you can see, I have 3 phases. I have the activation phase, collectivity phase, and institutionalization phase. And those phases are all based off membership, roles, goals, and leadership. And it worked out to where we could categorize that my Houston case in the activation phase, the earlier phases, Dallas in the collectivity phase, a bit further along, and Fort Worth in the institutionalization phase, which means you'll later see that they had a pretty impactful system in place. At the activation stage, we found that Houston was still a bit early on and trying to identify key stakeholders to engage. Roles were still a bit unclear. Goals were still unclear, because if you don't know the process, then you can't truly identify goals. And instead of the network, individuals, stakeholders within the network stepping up at different times, the COC was the main contact here. At the collectivity phase, Dallas, they had an agreed upon core group of participants. And what I found that these individuals had been working together for some time So they already knew each other's strengths and weaknesses and the resources they would be able to glean from one another. Roles were based on subject area expertise. There were monthly updates from monthly meetings and minutes, and subcommittees and facilitators were in leadership positions within this network structure. And for Fort Worth, there were former participants identified, and roles were based on contractual agreements. Again, weekly meetings with weekly updates, and formal administrative positions were established for the purposes of the emergency discharge coordination process. So what did we find? Activities in emergency discharge planning coordination. Again, Houston, they were still trying to identify key members and stakeholders and identify specific roles. Houston is a special case because HUD sent out technical assistance to help prepare them for the COC process. Fairly new, so as you can imagine, any setup or any startup, you'll have your challenges. And so having to really lean on the HUD technical assistance for that support was key for Houston. And HUD technical assistance typically help COCs that are poorly performing. So as you can see, Houston was activation stage, trying to put the pieces together. My Dallas case, there were routine procedures among a core group of stakeholders, clear roles and responsibilities. And what's interesting is that with the Dallas case, you see that the hospital social work team took over because, again, as I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, we find that homeless individuals are inappropriately using hospitals and emergency rooms. And so for the Dallas case, the hospital social work had seen these issues and took the lead on helping other key members to identify the issue and what needs to happen moving forward to combat this issue. And with Fort Worth, there were formal positions and contractual agreements in place. And interesting, Fort Worth specifically had an emergency discharge nurse that was created for the purpose of not placing individuals back into homelessness and for contacting these shelters once these individuals left, again, these public institutions such as jails, hospitals, or mental institutions. They were able to contact their partnering shelter and identify a certain number of respite beds to put on hold for these individuals. And again, this is done through contractual agreements, so they're a bit more formalized in the process. What did I find when I looked at the different stages, different phases of collaboration, and what were some of the factors in the different stages? Success factors included leadership, common goals, and relationship building. Again, as you can see with the 3 cases, leadership was exercised by different participants at different times throughout the collaborative process. So when my Houston case got up and running, so to speak, the COC was able to take charge and identify key stakeholders to participate in that, and they no longer had to lean on the HUD technical assistance for that. Common goals. Participants begin to coalesce around common network goals as a collaboration matures. And that happens because you have buy-in, you have these members who continue to work together. And again, as you can see with the Dallas case and the Fort Worth case, because those individuals had worked with each other before, and it's really a small community and individuals sitting on committees, and they know what resources to glean from other participants. You begin to form a core group and again to coalesce around these common network goals. So the goals are clear. And relationship building. Emphasis shifts from engaging participants to strengthening and nurturing relationships. So instead of focusing the efforts on who to engage in this process, you already have the relationships. They were able to just nurture them, strengthen them, and continue to identify participants that could be beneficial in the collaborative setting. As with any collaboration, there are challenges, and challenges experienced in emergency discharge planning coordination. Professional languages data systems and information sharing, and federal mandates and regulations. Professional languages. Shelters and hospitals do not speak the same language. So therefore, trying to understand the commonalities and the common ground was a bit hard in the earlier stages. The Houston case identified that the shelter and the hospital had been talking over one another until they finally realized they were saying the same things. And so patients had to come into the equation as well and say, hey, we're on the same team, we're saying the same thing. It's just that our professional language is different. Data systems and information sharing. Initial stages focused on different types of data systems, while later stages focused on information sharing. As we know, with confidential information, there are regulations and policies that prohibit you from sharing personal information about individuals, especially once they've entered into those public institutions like the hospital. So figuring out what data systems, because different COCs, they have to have a data system, but it doesn't tell you what specific type. So trying to be able to get that information, relay that information over to stakeholders, the appropriate information, and using the correct data systems is important. So we go from what systems are we using to figuring out how to appropriately share this information so that we can get this wraparound care for these individuals. Federal mandates and regulations. Lack of resources result in no respite care in Houston. These federal mandates say that we would like you to get these individuals off the streets and not place them back into homelessness when you already have a strained budget. And for Houston, the lack of resources, there was already no respite care in there. So you're saying, you want us to take these individuals and put them in the shelter with no respite care at the time, but there's no additional funding to do so. And again, when you have hospitals who don't require funding, who don't want to get into that line of participation, it's a bit difficult to have these federal mandates, but then leave it to these individual networks to figure out how to implement those structures and how to implement those regulations. So that was a bit interesting in itself. What does all of this mean? We know that collaboration goes through different phases and is better understood using a life cycle framework to examine the process to achieve collaboration maturity. We should expect to see different outcomes, different activities, and different factors as collaboration goes through. That's because different tasks and factors are highlighted at different phases and different times. Different actors engage in emergency discharge planning on leading roles at different stages of collaboration. So once you get the initial structure set up, the COC may not take the lead anymore, not in the initial stages, or you may see a hospital take the lead later on. But as it continues to grow, continue to network, the network continues to coalesce around these goals, different leaders emerge at different times, taking on different processes. And sometimes we know with collaboration, sometimes you have to have individuals step in and lead it because there's a lot on your plate. And so being able to share the responsibility, share those roles is important. And a life cycle framework helps us to understand that. Success factors and challenges are expressed in different capacities at each stage as emergency discharge collaboration matures. What may be a success factor in the initial stages may not be highly highlighted or emphasized in the latter stages. And what may prove to be a challenge in the initial stages may tail off and not be a challenge moving forward. We would hope that those challenges you see in the initial stages are indeed not the challenges that you see at latter stages, because you would hope that you've alleviated and found solutions to those strategies. Thank you for allowing me to share my presentation. Again, I'm Dr. Federickia Washington at Tennessee State University. Thank you.
Dr. Washington, thank you for your presentation. We'll move forward and I will share my screen. And please know that we will have, again, a question and answer session at the end of our time together today. All right. Allow me a moment for technical grace, please, as I bring up my presentation. All right, and can someone give me a thumbs up and let me know, do you see the presenter mode? Are you seeing the presentation? All right, thank you much. So moving us forward, fulfilling our mandate, emboldening researchers, community, and elected officials to impact systemic racism via research. My name again is Jennifer Harris, and I serve as the Research and Policy Manager for the Social Development Commission here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just a bit about my background. Over the last experience is spanning education, program administration, local government, and research. I look forward to sharing with you today some of the great things that SDC is doing in terms of our community outreach and our governance transpiring within our organization. A bit more about my background that lends to my current role beyond the opportunity to work for the R1 Institute that I had always desired to work for, the University at Wisconsin at Madison. Being engaged in research opened the understanding and thought of the chasm between academia and applied practice in the real world. And so that lands me in a spot that I am so proud to introduce you to today. So going forward, just wanted to again bring in the theme of the conference, the unmasking the complexities of identity, place, and space, the administrator's challenge, showing up as your full self and bringing your organization or your entity with you as well, presents a challenge that is very familiar to all of us. Pardon me if our loudspeaker announcement goes off in the background. So our challenge in doing this work in our space is bringing the historic context of our organization and really bringing the history of Milwaukee and the history of the nation to bear so we can render the services needed here in Milwaukee that impact actually the entire nation. So I can't do due diligence to explaining what's truly happening at SDC, the Social Development Commission, without giving a brief history lesson. And hopefully you like history as well. And oh, I forgot to say, feel free if you like to come on camera. I know we're multitasking and doing a million things, but if you've been in the presenter seat, you understand you love to see friendly faces while you're presenting. So good morning, Pat. And I saw Dr. Amity, but please feel free to join in and show your camera if you so feel. So I'm going to jump into a time period where people really don't focus their thought on as much in Milwaukee County, because we're about our forward movement, about progression and trying to make Milwaukee County better. But to really understand where Milwaukee County is, you have to go back to the 50s and 60s. The understanding of where Milwaukee County's true health was, Milwaukee was not in a great space. When it comes to public services and the services that are rendered of our current landscape, there's a great plethora of nonprofit and community-facing organizations. But going back to the 50s and 60s, these organizations did not exist in the multitude that they do now. Back in the 60s, early 60s, we all are familiar with the redlining that transpired across the nation. To the left, the furthermost left corner, this is a picture of Milwaukee County's redlining, actually the city zoomed in, the redlining efforts in Milwaukee. So the two larger red pockets, these are pockets that were solely concentrated for African-American individuals, with our surrounding suburbs being of higher quality ranking and eligibility for loans. So to be quite frank, Milwaukee County is one of the most segregated counties or spaces in the nation. And so this is the backdrop for the origins of the Social Development Commission. I will give great acknowledgement and the due respect to former CEO of SDC from 1968 until about 1988. Don Sykes, who is there on our right, and another influential individual in Milwaukee's history that actually impacted the nation, the Honorable Val Phillips, the first alderwoman of color in Milwaukee. But giving more reference, if we go down to the lower left-hand picture, the commandos, the NAACP, the groups that were on the ground trying to establish equity in Milwaukee County, were met with some formidable opponents. And one of those opponents was the picture directly in the middle, our former Mayor Meyer. Now, Mayor Meyer, you can see he has a pen in his hand, was a very busy individual. And in his tenure, he was outward facing and shared with the larger community his thoughts around segregation and around how individuals should be treated. And if you can read through the context, you can figure out what his thoughts were about Milwaukee County, especially individuals of color in Milwaukee County. But what he did in his tenure was put together and codify legislation, as well as move programming to, and at this present date, enhance Milwaukee County. At that present date, it was to really benefit himself and his colleagues. And I'll get into that history in a bit. So further jumping into the background so I can fast forward us to the future. If you're familiar with about 1963, the new frontier that was being ushered in by former President John F. Kennedy. Of course, the entire country was heartbroken at his assassination, but we had to move forward with the movement that President Lyndon B. Johnson put in place, moving us towards the ideal Great Society. So within the work of the Great Society that we have to attribute back to the new frontier, the idea around studying poverty was a great point of President Kennedy's administration. And that kind of lined up President Johnson with a plethora of research that led to building forward the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. I want to rewind back because Mayor Meyer, well networked and well resourced, knew that the Opportunity Act was coming and put into place the agency that would receive that funding. So again, the network spoke and the networks confirmed that you needed an agency to receive these monies. And so Mayor Meyer and his colleagues put together a commission. This commission had its first meeting date in 1963. And in 63, they put forward, codified actually, with the city, county, and state in matching ordinances and statutes to put in this commission in place. This commission, let's move forward, is by statute and by mandate is to have a group of individuals that represent a bipartisan body, to include individuals of clergy and minority groups, essentially his friends too, to move forward with the programming, with the money coming from the federal level. But in his broad stroke of his pen, he also stated that we should study, analyze, and recommend solutions for major societal ills and economic and cultural problems. And so basing that in research and poverty, that is how the commission was formed in 1963. Again, the commission mainly reflected his colleagues, so white male, with substantive focus on moving money into their businesses and their interests. But the community fought back. The community knew that these monies were being rendered so that they could move forward and be healthy. And so with that community's fight, there was an initiative to add on board members that represent the communities of impoverishment in Milwaukee County. And today, this board is constructed itself. This is the governance of the Social Development Commission. Our board chair is the esteemed Elmer Moore Jr., who serves as the executive director of WIDA, along with our 6 district commissioners and our 10 appointed commissioners, ranging from a representative from the county, the city, the state, our public school system, our university system, UW-Milwaukee is a representation, our technical college, the United Way, our clergy or our religious institutions are represented as well, the union, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, the African American, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So now there is a diverse board that has governance over the Social Development Commission and the operations. And our Board of Commissioners, to explain, they are board members on one side and commission members on the other. So now I'm going to go forward to explain that the Social Development Commission has a dual identity that is rarely understood. And so you actually are kind of privy to information that individuals in Milwaukee County don't understand still. The commission that was started by Mayor Meyer in 1963 precedes the actual community action agency that was written into law for the betterment of entities across the nation. And so to give further insight, the CAP agencies, there are more than 1,000 across the nation. And Milwaukee County, we currently have 16, or excuse me, Wisconsin currently has 16. And of the 16 in the state, Milwaukee County has the largest CAP agency. So again, not only are we a commission, but we are a CAP agency as well. And to give further insight into CAP agencies, the CAP agency is to take in the federal block funding and put towards programming to better your communities. All CAP agencies look different across the entire nation, but SDC has 5 different locations in concentrated areas of poverty, and we're seen and established as a quasi-governmental entity. And so moving us forward, we have the great understanding that the transformative things are what is the transformative research and transformative actions are going to move SDC forward into the future, as our transactional programming from our community action programming is transactional, is exactly that. We're giving services, we are providing resources, we're moving people towards the middle class. However, we're not looking at the long term, the picture of why they're coming in. And so SDC as an organization has pivoted our initial thoughts around providing services. SDC at present, as the years have ebbed and flowed, the agency has had more than 40 and actually operates more than 40 now programs in the vein of career services, education services, emergency services, food and nutrition services, housing, residential, senior services, mental health, financial services, and youth services. And again, every CAP agency across the nation looks different because it is tailored to the communities that it serves. SDC, I mentioned a moment ago, we have pivoted. We took the opportunity, as you have to do needs assessments every 3 years, it should be partnered with a strategic plan. Our last strategic plan, 2019 through 2024, highlights the need to act on the original mandate that I showed a few slides ago to research and to build forward advocacy in our communities, because we know we're called to do work that's both transactional and transformative to make a true change. So moving forward with the framework that research, advocacy, and policy go hand in hand, this trifecta, they feed into each other. And as SDC's programs have ebbed and flowed over the years, SDC moved away from research and focused on early childhood, energy assistance. It's a lot easier to focus on the tangible, the things that people understand that they can receive. And it's a little harder to think of the abstract, to have the community engaged. But now we have the firm understanding and the realization of our mandate that we must research to move Milwaukee County forward. And so and I'm saying this in the quickest time because I'm being very conscious of time, but there was significant work put into the development of the Institute on Poverty and Systemic Racism. This space is the revitalization of SDC's research arm. And so research, again, was at the heart of SDC's origin, and throughout SDC's history, there have been more than 100 publications and research studies. However, again, because we're humans and we go towards the tangible, the research arm of SDC was weakened and dismantled. And now with this new effort, the Institute has moved forward and has taken the bold mission of emboldening researchers, community, and policymakers to eradicate poverty. With a vision that we know that community-centered research will drive policy decision-making and transformative change. Again, research is the key to aid in moving the community forward for real advocacy. SDC itself cannot do this work. We are bipartisan, as well as we cannot lobby. It is written into our mandate. But what we can do is use our research arm to further educate the community. And the creation of white paper on top of white paper is not our aim. Our aim is to make digestible, applicable research initiatives so our community can be informed and move that information from information to advocacy onto policy change. I would be remiss if I did not mention the phenomenal team of scholars that have been assembled for our Institute on Research, our Institute on Poverty and Systemic Racism. We have our Research and Science Advisory Council that is the governance within our Research Institute. And I'm so proud to state that Dr. Keenan Grinnell is serving as our chair. We have member Dr. James Amity. We have member Dr. James Adams, member Dr. George Amity, member Dr. Danita Ball, member and Dr. Annie Bonds, Dr. Terry Darun Cassini, Dr. John Manch, Dr. Pavlik, and Dr. Torres, and Dr. Don Terryville, in which, in the sake of time, because I'm running out of time, they're coming from, they're industry titans with specific emphasis in fields that are meaningful to the forward progression in Milwaukee County, ranging from law enforcement, public administration. We're looking at geography, urban housing, trauma, mental health, neurobiology, education, psychology, and government relations. So we're spanning, and we know our council will grow in the future, but right now we're at the infant stage of the work and putting the foundation together. On from there, we have been a busy group over the last 3 years. This is actually my first year with SDC, and in the last 6 months, the Institute was launched with their first research study, first fully funded research study, the Drive Out Racism Together research study. And again, to embolden researchers, community, and policymakers to eradicate poverty is the mission of the Institute on Poverty and Systemic Racism. I can quote one of our illustrious advisory council members who stated, Dr. Manch stated, this is a very unique space where we can broach the our major organizations may not have comfort in. And in coming from higher education, I understand bureaucracy, and I understand that red tape does exist, but we've created a space that will invite researchers to push forward issues that may be seen as taboo within their organizations, so we can have that research that is transformative that will move our county forward. And again, as Milwaukee County goes, the entire nation, because this is not a unique situation of the individuals that live the experience of poverty, as well as our education system, and our conditions are no different from what's transpiring. And so with my last minute, I would like to highlight again that this research will move to empower our community to advocacy and move forward into policy, and the cycle will continue. SDC, again, being a quasi-governmental agency, is mandated to recommend to the county, city, and state level. And so that brings the whole circle, that brings the whole cycle back around, engaging community, making sure that we are justly positioned in the community with our locations, and our community relations liaisons being a part of the community to move not only the community, but also our elected officials that we have great partnership with forward to help us cultivate research that is meaningful. I will pause and mention that the book to the left of my screen, In the Arena, if you have interest in understanding the story about community action in Wisconsin, was written by one of SDC's CEOs, Dr. Deborah Blanks, and is a great resource that connects the national level movement with Wisconsin's movement in terms of community action. And the book to is truly the story of SDC and how community action developed and set the grounds for all of the other organizations that were birthed from SDC. One of our advisory council members was joking, but he was very serious in creating and finding that graduate student. So if you know anybody, finding the graduate student that will write the history from 1970 to forward about SDC, which is a very compelling story and explains the structure of Milwaukee and our war on poverty. With that, I will close and thank you for your attentiveness and learning more about the Social Development Commission, our governance, and the space that we bring in fighting the fight of poverty in Milwaukee County. All right, and I will stop sharing, and I will invite, pardon me, and I will invite Codi to share screen, and you now have the floor.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Codi Smith. I'm very happy to be here today. So today I will be talking about the impact of board capacity on community foundation performance. Okay, just a brief about me. I am a second-year PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I am studying the power structures, governance, and performance of community foundations. This is actually my second time attending COMPA. The first time I was a master's student, and I did not present, I just showed up. And this actually was a place where people put in my ear, placed the seed for me to receive my PhD. So I'm really glad to be back here for this full circle. Also, I have 6 years of nonprofit and public service experience. So here's the agenda. Just going to do introduction, my research question, hypothesis, theory, data and methods, and then some preliminary findings. So first, just an introduction, and I do apologize if this is remedial for anyone, but I have found myself increasingly having to really explain what a community foundation is. So that's just what the purpose of this chart is. So a community foundation is a type of public foundation. And following along the chart, the two primary differences of a community foundation to public and private foundations is with their gifts received. So again, they do receive public funds, but they have another giving vehicle called a donor advised fund, which allows donors to have direct say in where their money goes. It's also, you could kind of relate it to like a charitable bank account. But at the same time, the donor is not required to expend that money every year. There are increasing policies that are putting restrictions on any type of inactivity. But again, that's something very, very unique to community foundations. And then when looking at the giving area, community foundations are local. So this is typically a city, a county, or it could be like a clustering of counties. And then also just very brief history with this one sentence. Community foundations have been around a very long time. They began in Cleveland, Ohio, my home state, in 1914. And since then, they've actually grown internationally as well. And then just again, looking at its financial impact, if we look at the Columbus survey, which has been tracking community foundation activity since 1988, in 2020, out of 211 foundations surveyed, and there's over 900 community foundations right now, so it's not even a quarter. They found that there's $104.4 billion in assets. They received $13.3 billion in gifts, and they gave $11.6 billion in grants. So again, this is especially significant due to the concept of investing local dollars for local returns. So getting to my research question, I want to ask a question: to what extent does the board of directors capacity explain the performance of community foundations? Just in general, we all know board of directors tend to have a very, which has been spoken of already, they have a very big say in what happens within an organization. They're very vital to the success of the organization. And especially in the case of community foundations, I just want to investigate how boards do influence their financial impact. So the hypothesis, first one is community foundations that have greater board capacity will have higher fiscal efficiency. Second is community foundations that have greater board capacity will have higher grant allocation. And the way I approached this was through two dependent variables: total fiscal efficiency, which is a ratio of total revenue over total expenses minus total grants. And then grant making performance, which is another ratio, it's total grants over total assets. The independent variables are board orientation, board training, and board experience. And then lastly, the control variables are just because there is quite a wide variety in terms of assets, are the age of the organization, just how long they've been around, again, the size regarding to the assets, and then what is the size of their board. All right. So main theory I've taken from this, when looking at performance, given the public nature of community foundations and their innate community involvement, again, particularly through the DAF, this places an additional requirement that funds are managed and allocated according to stakeholder expectations. So once again, in terms of testing, this will be approached by the overall financial efficiency of the organization, as well as grant making performance. Grant making in particular may serve as a signal of a community foundation's generosity and the strategic direction of their philanthropy overall. When looking at board capacity, I chose board capacity because although it is closely tied to board capital, which is just identified as human capital and relational capital, I found it important to focus on this because when we're looking at the board, it's much more than just like the inputs or items that one may possess, but also what can actually be produced from those inputs. And then lastly, board role. There are a lot of theories about boards, but for the sake of my project, I'm just looking at democratic theory, which posits that board members serve as representatives of constituent interests. Methods, I completed, or I distributed a survey last summer. I contacted 901 community foundations, and that was through email. I sent 4 emails, phone call if they did not have an email available, or just doing a follow-up if they did not answer the email. And then finally, just good old-fashioned post mail if I couldn't find any other, or I couldn't get in contact with anyone else. And the questionnaire was adapted from GWA and Acker, their nonprofit governance survey, then also from BoardSource, their index of nonprofit board practices. I received 205 responses, and then after response and completion rate, that came to about 158 viable data points. And then in terms of the financial data, this primarily came from the 2019 NCCS core files. However, those files do not include grants paid. So I had to use some panel data that I received. And then again, with any missing organizations that either weren't in NCCS or the panel data, I pulled the 990s directly, and that was about 38 of them that I did by hand. So financial, I promise there's not too many numbers in this presentation, but just very briefly, when looking at grants paid, the average of, again, just my subset is a little over 7 million, but the max is $150 million. So again, there is quite a bit of variance when it comes to the size of community foundations. And again, with this are 8.4 million, and average of total revenue is 12.2 million. Also, again, we see the student data. This is essentially just like the raw information. So next steps are actually do the categories according to asset size. But when looking at correlation between the major financial variables that I've identified, we see that grants paid and total expenses, it's nearly 1. This is highly correlated. Then next are grants paid and total revenue, then total expenses and total revenue, and total assets and total revenue. So just before I hopped on, I realized I did something incorrectly, which is why I don't have the results of the control variables. But again, this is just kind of like the raw information I received. So we could see that the expected value of grant expenditures is actually $412,000, $412,000. Also, for every $1 of grants paid, assets decrease by 0.01, expenses decrease by 0.79, or yes, increase, liabilities increase by 0.02. So we see that the end of year assets, the total expenses, and total revenue are significant. And then when we want to, and when looking at the residual effect, I'm not going to do results. So initially, when I did this project, I wanted to look at accreditation. So there is a national standards accreditation, donor relations development. But as one could probably assume, is that with these standards set, that then means that the community foundation is doing a pretty good job with the management of similarities and differences. So we do see that across the board, whether or not a community foundation is accredited, that we see similarities with their board orientation, consecutive board term limits, and their grant application requirements. But some key differences are the number of members serving on committees. Accredited organizations tend to have more, and then the absence of fundraising committees. Again, accredited organizations actually have less standing committees that are primarily on fundraising. Now we go to just kind of generally like the board characteristics and composition. So we look to the right, the the average board size is going to have board orientation, which is really great. 44% of orientations are conducted in person. And some of the other things I asked was, did the board just receive kind of like the board book, which is a document of instructions or just what's going on, if there was like an online mechanism, and then other, say, possible, it could be over the phone or something. And then 77% of orientations take 1 to 3 hours. And when we look at training, 56% of organizations offer board training, which also is pretty good. 46% of trainings are conducted in person. Around 89% of trainings take 1 to 3 hours, and then 40% of trainings do not occur regularly. Again, what I asked was, did this occur annually, biannually, quarterly? And there just were a lot of other categories that people noted. And then when it comes to expenses, expense experience, 43% of organizations allow members to serve for 3 consecutive terms, and 54% of terms are 2 to 3 years in length. So when it comes to these community foundations, a lot of board members are there for quite a long time. And then when looking at the composition, we see that both executives of like corporations, foundations, and residents of the neighborhood are pretty comparable. They're pretty even. We also see a high number of board members who are also the executive of another nonprofit. And then just in general, with the composition, a majority of members are professionals. And with this question, so looking at the numbers and the amount I surveyed, this is much greater because it was a select all. So again, this is just an aggregate of the community foundations that I surveyed. Then looking at funding and committees. So first with funding, so again, this is also an aggregate. People could select more than one, but still it was deemed like, what are your primary funding goals? So we see that youth, and this is the top, then followed by arts and culture, education, and health services. And while religion is relatively low, that's still, or lower than the other categories, it's still high considering that, I only surveyed 158. So it's very interesting to see that there's still prominence of religious activities, or activities or organizations that people want to support. And then when we go to the committee makeup, we see that both for fundraising committees and grant making committees, that board members are the largest segment. But it does appear that there's a slight preference for community members and within grant committee membership. And then also it's really interesting to see that in both committees that majority of them meet more than 4 times a year. So good to see that there's a lot of communication around how the community foundation will approach their philanthropy. Then we have the grant process. About 52% of community foundations require at least an application to receive funding. So again, this was a select all. It was an application, a letter of intent, or other, or other, and then an invitation directly from the community foundation. Yes, majority of them are just an application. And then 19% require multiple elements. And then in terms of how grants are selected, again, this was a select all. So we see majority, at the very least, they do use that grant committee to select grants. And then also interesting to see that just as many who use the board members just use multiple. So it could be committee and board member, or community members and the committee, or the grant committee. So again, it seems there's a lot of interaction between different types of people to make these decisions. And just some general, I don't have an implications slide, but just some general implications. Seems that professionalization is very apparent within community foundations, regardless of their size or accreditation. It also seems that community foundations are keen on maintaining community connection, board training, and several consecutive terms and the length of their terms. And lastly, there's a high level of community involvement and financial decisions, once again, particularly in grant making, which is hopeful for their commitment to community. And that is the end of my presentation.
All right, Codi, thank you for your presentation. And so we have the duration of our time to field any questions, any comments, or any ideas that were brought forward. And so we will open the floor. And I see there's a message. Friends, I opened a breakout room. Bring that whole message up. 5 minutes early and did not include an additional 5 minutes for a 90-minute timer. Once breakout opens, I cannot update this timer, please forgive. So if we run out of time, I believe we're asking to go into the main room or re-enter the breakout room for an additional 7 to 10 minutes. All right. Hope that was clear to everyone. So if we run out of time, they're asking us to either join a larger group or to come back into our breakout session for a continued conversation. All right, so I will open it back up. Oh, you're more than welcome. I'll open it back up to, I'm gonna start with our presenters first. If there's any parting information that you would like to share. And then we can open up for questions for those that are in the room. So Dr. Washington or Codi, do you have anything that you'd like to enter into the conversation?
No questions that I, or follow-ups for my presentation. I do have questions whenever that time comes for you and Codi, whenever.
All right, I'd say thank you much, and thank you for your presentation. For both your presentations is ensuring that people that are in a state of without housing have that dignity moving forward and the services needed. And Codi, that speaks directly to my heart as I serve as a community member on 2 different boards and in the grants making experience. So that resonates with my experience as a member on the community side. I will say thank you for presenting, and thank you for taking in the information about the Social Development Commission. With our renewed effort, I keep stopping myself from saying new, with our renewed effort of engaging in research and making meaningful and actionable research accessible to the community. I did want to put out there, I forgot to mention that this space not only is for Milwaukee County's betterment, but the entire nation. And in the future, we will be accepting associate researchers and moving forward in other veins of research that we look forward to welcoming you and informing you in the future. All right, so any questions? We can go with the flow since it's a smaller group. Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you'd like to use chat, please do so, but we welcome your questions.
Yeah, I have a question, some questions for each of you. I want to congratulate each of you on outstanding presentations, all related to very different areas. My first question is for Dr. Washington. In terms of her particular presentation on discharge planning. I got to get that concept out of my head because I always related to the criminal justice system with people trying to transition back to neighborhood communities. But I guess my comment has to do with I like the idea that you looked at the stages of leading to what you're trying to deliver and measure the success. One of the things that I grapple with, however, is I think you made some comment about the runaround or folk getting some kind of spinning their wheels. And so I wasn't really clear on how you define that, but sometimes we look at if there's some type of recidivism or repeat kind of involvement with the people that you're trying to serve. But it's been brought to my attention another way of looking at that may be that maybe the need was not addressed in total, and that sometimes looking at, so I don't know how you measure that, but sometimes looking at the fact that you have to send someone to somewhere else or do something additional could possibly looked at in a positive vein. So I would like to hear your reaction to that. Sometimes people look at that in that way.
Thank you for your question, Dr. M.Ed. And I do think when you talk about individuals, my language was being ping pong from system to system.
Big pong, right?
Yes, sir, being ping pong from system to system. And I think that when we talk about, like you said, individuals leaving jails, trying to get acclimated back into the community, that is a hard thing to measure because there are different components and factors that you could take into consideration. And I definitely agree when you said that if one organization or one entity may not have the space or the capacity, that they are able to call up a sister shelter or someone or some institution that does have the capacity to take them, that is a success factor in itself. Specifically, when I talk about success factors in the process of collaborating for homeless emergency discharge planning, I'm looking at what factors allow these organizations to just gel and move the individuals along and to create and implement some type of strategy for these individuals. And so leadership is always one that continued to highlight itself in what I found in the literature on collaboration. Because if you don't have a good leader leading in these entities and stating that these are the goals and objectives and this is what we have to do, then these individuals continue to fall by the wayside, which is what I found with the Houston case, and that the leadership was fairly new and that they had to send some HUD technical assistance to get them started and to identify those clear goals and objectives. And so being able to measure success factors wasn't quite what this presentation or this study did. It was what factors within that allows them to be successful. Because if you and I are collaborating to talk about homelessness, there may be a language barrier based on your professional background and expertise. And so just trying to combat that. And so leadership would essentially play into that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. You clarified.
Okay.
Maybe I was going at the wrong thing because I always look at success, performance, and those things, and there are many different ways of defining that.
There are.
Also, I'm very interested in the homelessness as it relates to those with mental health kind of issues, which is a very difficult group. I'm currently getting involved in a project where we're looking at mobile crisis response, from the 911 emergency, but setting up a group that exclusively addresses the mobile crisis, particularly, those with mental health, and I'm just wondering in terms of the homeless issue, how significant, what share of the clients that are served You know, is mental health an underlying issue? And because that would have implications for the stages that would be involved.
Yes, sir, that is a good question. For this study, the overall project, I do have those numbers for the percentage of mental health. For this study, I don't have them readily available for you, but I can tell you that mental health is highly present with these individuals, which is why it is important that a lot of these continuum of care structures are trying to create these wraparound systems, create these holistic approaches, because you want individuals to be able to go and get not only medical assistance, but you want them to be able to get mental health as well. And so, for example, the Bridge, my case in Dallas, they boast about being highly replicated structure, where they allow individuals to come in and get help with, maybe you had a warrant, maybe you need to learn how to go to job interviews, maybe you need to specifically learn how to get acclimated back into your own home so you can stay here for a while, in that type of semi-structured process. They have created, and other shelters and CLCs are trying to mimic that holistic approach, because as you said, Dr. Amity, mental health is definitely an underlying issue, and it is something that creates more problems if left unaddressed. And again, we'll see they'll continue to be ping pong from system to system, because one shelter may categorize it as one being, when it's really a mental health issues that needs to be addressed and can be addressed. So it can impact a lot of different factors. And I think that is a good point. Again, I don't have those numbers readily available for this presentation, but I'm more than happy to email or follow up with conversation about it.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. Dr. Harris, I want to raise a question, because I'm so fortunate to sit in this presentation, because I've kind of seen some of it before, and my comment was initially some of it flew over my head, but this time I get a second look, so that was very encouraging. And I am so excited about being involved with the Institute, with the research arm of that. I'm gonna tell you my concerns from a research standpoint. I think it's very clear what the goal is, but of course, the nature of research is, I've been taught, you kind of bite one piece off at a time. You can't, can we ever get to the point of saying that we've addressed the overall issue of racism and poverty, at some point in time? So what that means to me is that from the applied research into things, you're biting off small pieces. And so I'm wondering, because of the nature of what you're dealing with, what implications does that have for this idea of success? How do we, when do we say we're successful? Are we successful by individual applied research projects and the recommendations, and how the recommendations for a specific area is acted upon by those in the the policy and administration? So that's what kind of been going through my mind in terms of trying to address that. Could you respond to that?
Rightfully
if you understand what I'm saying.
Rightfully so. My mother is the queen of corny jokes, and her favorite joke is, how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah, right.
One bite at a time. And so, to your point, we will be taking structured initiatives to chip away at some of the major issues here in Milwaukee County. To your point, yes, the measure of success is going to be very difficult. That is a part of our advisory council's work to help us put in place some of those key indicators to show our progress, to show that we're benchmarking and moving forward. But we know we are one entity where there's an entire county to be impacted. And so we will partner and we will collaborate to move forward our designated metrics of impact. It's starting from the ground, and you're right there at the ground with me. But again, taking one bite at a time, that's how we're going to move forward. Thank you.
And then last, Dr. Smith, and I'm speaking in the prophetic, I enjoyed your presentation quite a bit, very quantitative in its orientation, and that's always good to have a mix of qualitative and quantitative. But in terms of boards, which I've been on boards, and I understand this is not a study of all nonprofit or foundation boards, but this unique area of community foundations, correct? So I guess, my experience with boards, and you may have touched on this somewhat, because I kept saying to myself, those other variables were very good, but the demographics and the people who are on the board, in my opinion, drive the success. They could have millions of years of experience and still be jackasses, excuse my expression. And so that was one of the things that I thought that had a lot to do with success as well. And so, I'm just, and there was another that I think slipped my mind. I had one more comment. I'll come back to it and of course, the other that I think drives is politics. And, there were no political variables in the sense that I observed. And that may not be as applicable to the foundations you're looking at, for the foundation you're looking at, but to what I know some of the more successful foundations have ones that politics and connections in politics are also a driving force.
I'm going to jump in quickly to say this room will close in 19 seconds. So if we can ask everyone to log back in, you'll be put into the larger group, but please come back to breakout session 4. About 10 seconds left. So Cody, you can ideate while we transition back into the room. Technology put us right back in here. All right, technology. All right, so Cody, that gave you a few seconds to ideate.
Yes, definitely. So thank you for your questions. So first, your point with like politics or advocacy, there is a section of the survey, and I realized I did not say what the sections are, so I really apologize for that. Let me find it real quick. Where did it go? I can't find it. Well, there's a part of the survey that looks at community leadership. That was in partnership with someone. So those were their questions. I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow to see how they want to analyze that section. But that gets more at the place of community foundations within the community, how they can be leaders, how can they affect change. So that was a part of the survey. And then in terms of trying to identify jackasses, I'm not too sure how I would do that. So I did kind of step away. I think there's two kind of trends when it comes to boards. It's looking at the board's perception of their performance. So just asking board members directly how they think things are going. And then like the composition or like the diversity piece, like where are people coming from? I want to remain objective because I don't think,
Hey everybody, this session goes into lunch, so feel free to stay as long as you want, because I've been going in and out of these rooms and I know that you guys have some really interesting things you're talking about. Feel free, but just know that you have the whole 30 minutes of lunch that, you know, before the next session. Thank you.
Yeah, I was mainly speaking of recruitment and selection kind of issue. Yeah, recruitment and selection.
Yeah, I haven't. I also did do a handful, I think it's about 9 semi-structured interviews. It was kind of mixed in terms of how people felt about their boards, which you know, could assume. But that is a good question. I'm trying to think of how I could extend that. But again, like with looking with the responses of the surveys, it does seem that people stay on the board for quite some time. There were
but if the literature didn't really, you know, lead you in that direction, you know, maybe that might be just something I'm thinking, you know, but go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's completely fair. And which why I, you know, there are quite a few people who go like straight through to get their PhDs, but I do have some work experience in particularly with boards and fundraising. So that I always do try to keep that lens of like, what does it actually mean in the real world and like for practitioners. But yeah, that actually isn't something I've thought about too much, but yeah, I'll definitely add that, something to investigate.
Thank you.
So being mindful of time, we can continue forward. We have about 3.
It was
Ms.
Codi was
Harris?
breaking up. Now it's Jennifer.
Yeah, Ms. Harris.
I think it's her internet.
Are you there? Can you hear me now?
I think
boy.
she paused again.
She's frozen.
Well, while she's
why don't you just go here with your question,
okay.
Dr. Washington?
Okay, well, I would like to start. The first question I had was for Ms. Harris, but Codi, congratulations on the full circle moment with being a MPA student. I think you said MPA student, and then coming back as a doctoral student. And I want to say love and light on your PhD journey. And as Dr. M.Ed has said, we're going to speak that into existence because that will happen.
That's right.
I think you had a great presentation. So my PhD is in public administration and management from University of North Texas. And my specific specialization is nonprofit. So when you talk about boards and how many board members, like this is what I teach to my graduate students, because there's always this question of how many board members is too many, right? Because you get all these different ideas and then it prolongs the process. And as Dr. M.Ed said, you know, you get these board members because they come from different walks of life and they can add to your structure for various reasons. Did you find, and maybe you didn't, and that could be something you can explore, maybe not. I was just curious that are these individuals being asked to serve on the board, or are they wanting to do so for specific reasons? Like what's their MO for coming to these boards and serving? And do you know what they bring with them? Because the literature does tell us that, you know, you want someone who's well connected, as Dr. M.Ed said, the politics, and you want someone who has wealth. So the different pockets, are you seeing that in your research?
I would say for now, and this is again just based off the interviews I did, that there's definitely been a pivot, you know, 2020 in a lot of ways. One, we did see a lot more like expenditure from those donor advised funds within community foundations during that time, but also we did see a shift to more to emphasize race and equity. So I did have quite a few conversations where people were saying that they were looking for more community members and for people who match their values. And then in particular, there were a few who, even in terms of nonprofits who could receive their funds. And one was very interesting in that they perceive diversity across the board as kind of like a no tolerance. If I could say it that way. So like if it was a primarily Black organization and they did not have anyone who was not Black, they would not be a prospective recipient. So it's been really interesting how people have tried to approach that. But again, I think, yeah, I would say the biggest emphasis is on like community members, and then quite a few of just like they are waiting for some board members to get off because they want to really push these like social issues that seem to continue to ramp up. But yeah, based off of the survey, I didn't find that information.
Thank you for that. I think that, you know, the 2 to 3 year timeframe that you had in your presentation, it could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. You know, it's just one of those things, you take it as it comes, but thank you for that. Ms. Harris, I wanted to say, what a great presentation. I'm sitting here like, what? I haven't heard of this. What? I mean, and it was so informative, and I think that it is so needed, especially in communities where there are individuals that look like you and I. I think that one component that stood out about your research is that you guys knew that like research was needed, and then it was kind of stalled, and then there's a push to get back to research. And my question was, what was that push? Because I think we all know in this session that, you know, the research outcomes can drive what you put into place for those communities and can have lead to better impacts, because the research and the literature tells us, and then we go and we make it applicable, right? What was the push for that, one? And then two, you mentioned digestible and applicable. I think that is something that is just, you would think that people would get it, because you and I could sit here and talk over each other's heads and then try to go to the community and they wouldn't know what the impacts are. So that's important. When you talk about the push, so that was 2, are community members being engaged in this process? Because I think it's important. I know for us, when we ask the shelters, you know, what do these homeless individuals need? They have a committee where it is required for a homeless individual to sit on that committee because they know exactly what they need and what those direct resources should be. So is that a thing too?
Great questions. So the push for why this is transpiring now, it's been a few years in development. It's because of leadership. You mentioned earlier that leadership is a key catalyst in the work that you're doing, and especially the work we're doing here. SDC had a series of CEOs that weren't the right fit, and then a long-term CEO that retired, and Dr. Hinton took over, I want to say 8 years ago. And in that 8-year span, he was trying to figure the organization out. The organization was still well known in the community. This is coming into our 60th year, well known into the community, has been there, has birthed several nonprofits that do community facing work. But the transactional work started bothering him. It started bothering him to the point that he said, well, what are we doing? We just can't keep putting a Band-Aid over the wound that the community has. And so learning more, and of course, institutional knowledge is key for every organization. We had a lawyer who just retired, Attorney Hall, who had the historic context. He served under the first lawyer that worked for SDC. So he knew the history, the true history. He knew where everything was hidden. He knew where all bones were buried, and he brought forward the actual mandate, the state statute, the ordinances from the county and the city that are mirroring, and really spoke truth to power in what SDC should be doing, that SDC, of course, forgot, because institutional knowledge, after turnover in CEOs and new staff, this became, it just wasn't common knowledge. And so upon Dr. Hinton's discovery, he strategically set his feet on the path to address SDC becoming that entity that uses research as a vehicle to reach out to the community to further inform the community. The reason why it's actionable research, why it's purposeful, if I tell many Milwaukee Countyans that 17% of us live in poverty in Milwaukee County, it's like, okay, that's 17%. But if you break it down and you bring people in so it is something that is digestible and that's meaningful to them. If I say, and everybody is so proud of our Milwaukee Bucks, even though we're 15 games running, so we're having a really good season, and we're world champions beyond that. But if you really think of our Pfizer form from floor to ceiling is about 17,000 individuals can fit in there comfortably. If you think and you explain people, well, if you take 9 Pfizer forms plus, you'll have what it looks like to have 17% of poverty. That 17% equals 9 Pfizer forms. And so we want to make it so it's actionable, so it's understandable, it's relatable rather, so people can take this information forward. We have high concentration of our work is in mental health. We're looking at moving forward into our home. We're HUD certified for home advising, but we also have healthy home initiatives that remediate lead from housing. The community does not understand the state that it's in right now. We are Flint, Michigan. We're actually a little bit worse, and people don't understand it and continue forward with the use of water. The remediation from window seals and soil have not truly been addressed on a grand scale, the magnitude that it needs to transpire. If we stay with our county's current plan, it'll take 80 years to get rid of all of the lead piping and the lead laterals in Milwaukee County. 80 years impacts too many generations. And I do this work out of love. I love not only myself, my community, but I'm looking at my 4-year-old, and I cannot imagine a world that I purposefully allowed that to happen. And so again, educating the community to move forward into advocacy and demanding change, because again, SDC cannot do it itself. We have to have the community rally forward. And the community engagement that you mentioned, yes. So SDC is required every 3 years to do a community needs assessment. And that needs assessment also brings in focus groups from community members. But beyond that, because we've been doing that for decades, beyond that, the structure of the Institute at present has the establishment of the advisory council, and we are looking forward to build the community element of a community advisory board. We just, and this is news to Dr. Amity, so sorry to surprise you, but working with partnership with Marquette University, one of our advisory council members was just awarded an additional fellowship and is giving that money to our institute so we can have the beginnings of our community facing board. So we are well on the way. And I say this because it feels like I've been here a million years. I've only been here 1 year, and the Institute has been up and running for about 6 months in its soft launch capacity. In that 6 months, we also have submitted and been accepted and asked to further submit NIH COMPA, a COMPAS application. And to my understanding, we should really be proud of our standing as an institute. Even though we are newer, we're moving forward, we're progressing, and we do have the ear of our governor, of our mayor, and of our county executive. So it's not just doing research to research. We're not publishing white paper. We're not publishing the parish over here. We're publishing and we're doing the research so it can be applied right back to the community. And I did not speak of, and I'm a time on task person, so I was watching the timer in the background. And I didn't speak much of our DRIVE research study. I am so proud of that work being done. It's funded by our Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Foundation in conjunction with the medical college. This institute really is a space bringing forward and setting the the platform for multi-institutional work. So the Medical College, UW-Milwaukee, and Marquette have come together to put together this research study looking at the individual, the neighborhood, and the community level impact of racism and discrimination. In no way am I recruiting. I have to say that because I'm one of the co-Is. But I think it's very important that this work is being done and then given back to the community. Coming from our local county government, I served in the inaugural office of the Office of African American Affairs for Milwaukee County. Behind the work to put in place the Declaration of Racism as a Public Health Crisis, and also give notice to Lillian Payne and the work of UW Population Health and Match that brought this declaration forward. Applying it in the space of the county and being the first government entity to make that declaration was a huge step. I have so many contacts around the nation that have said, hey, your work has helped us springboard into work that our municipality would not address. And so I'm proud of that work, but it stops at a point. It stops at the point that you can declare racism as a public health crisis, say it's a problem, state the stats of infant mortality here in Milwaukee, which are abysmal, and that's it. There's work that has been done and that is still occurring, but the work here at the Institute picks up that declaration and makes it a reality. Why are we unhealthy? What does it truly look like to impact an individual and not just look at community level data that's out there? We can say that people are traumatized, but let's look down the index and see why they're traumatized and how we can create programming that is not only beneficial, but do the long-term strategic planning that we need to do to ensure that individuals don't have this trauma transpire in the first place. So there's a lot going on over here. I am enthused about the work that we do, but in the long picture, I look to work myself out of a job. I'll find something else. That really doesn't matter. But the important part is that I can be healthier, that my community can be healthy, that my daughter doesn't have these same questions in another 60 years.
Ms. Harris, your passion for the project and the work you're doing, it just speaks volumes. And I am happy that these initiatives are in place. I think that you say you'll always have a job. Yes, you will. Yes, you will, because your passion has come through. And I just think that's amazing. That it's, like you said, it's not just researching to publish to peers, but to help individuals within the community. I think that's specifically what we're supposed to do, publish to get, results within communities. But this is amazing. And I look forward to continue to follow it and follow the work that you guys are doing there. I think it's great.
Thank you. And again, the invitation to engage in the future, it's out there. We look forward to bringing together minds to move us forward, because we know Milwaukee County, we don't have the answers ourselves. In America, we may not have the answers ourselves. So we will be also looking internationally in the future, so we can start to remediate the problems that we know we need to address. Oh, and I wanted to ask before people depart for lunch. And so Dr. Amity brought up the thought of mental health in our more transient population. It's come to my attention recently that the foster care systems, individuals that age out of the foster care systems, are heading straight to our shelters, as well as individuals, if they are I don't even want to say fortunate or lucky enough to break the cycle of human trafficking, are heading there, as well as the immigrant population that does not speak English. I think you spoke to that's a lot of people heading towards seeking shelter, and those services are so varied for all of those individual subsets of people. What are your plans forward to further mobilize your research?
That is a great question, because even the specific populations and categories that you named, just post-pandemic, right, and affordable housing, that we're seeing an increase in numbers there. So future research, definitely, I want to go back to the drawing board because I'm sure leadership has changed within this time that, I've done this research. More services just post-pandemic. And like you said, with the individuals aging out and human trafficking just being a disastrous topic in itself. I definitely want to go back and see what additional services have been offered. How are you handling this increase in numbers? Because as you know, some of the shelters, they are a specific type of shelter. So they can, based on the funding they receive, they can only take a specific population. They can take a family, which means they can't take a husband, or there may be a low barrier shelter, which means we got to split up families because, we have women and children here. So it'll be interesting to see what those numbers are, what services are now being provided, how the wraparound approach has taken off, because I think just in Tennessee alone, we're starting to see an increase in homeless individuals. Housing costs are pushing individuals out. And so that becomes a bit more difficult with we call those hidden homeless individuals where, they're couch surfing. And so some of those individuals aren't specifically accounted for because you can't count them all the time because, So going back and following up and seeing the additional services, additional leadership changes, because that seems to be a thing within these committees as well. Just what has happened post-pandemic and what are your goals to do? And so I have a list of contacts that I've been trying to reach out, but when someone gives you that time, you take advantage because time is of the essence. And so just trying to get back on these individuals' radar and calendars to schedule up follow-ups is what I proceed to do for next steps.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. I see Dr. Amity, you're off of mute, and I think we still have Brian and I don't want to mispronounce Ashley. Were there any last questions, comments?
I'm sure Brian got a comment since he's my former student. Brian, are you there? He's ghosting on me, huh?
I was trying to unmute myself.
I thought you were.
I didn't have a question. I had actually a lot of comments, but I wanted to hold my comments to the end. Thank you, Dr. Amity, for reminding me. But actually, I just wanted to say, I actually love everything that you did and what you showed, and it was very informative also. I agree with that. And actually it's helping me right now because I actually deal with a lot of boards and I'm on a lot of boards. And just to tell a quick story, I'm on a fire board, which I am the only minority on the fire board. Everyone else is a white male over the age of between the age of 75 through 85. And I'm the only person on the board that's in their early 30s. So what that said is we have two different perspectives and how these boards, it's actually a fire department board for over 100,000 people. And oh, I'm sorry, let me take out the background noise. Want to hear me good?
Yes.
Okay. So I forgot to plug in my microphone. So just with that, and also I'm also deal with a lot of planning boards and boards of adjustments and construction boards and electrical boards with my current job, and then making how the board is formed and all the different rules and regulations and changing. I'm actually doing that right now. So you actually just gave me a lot of ideas, and I'm actually going to take some stuff out of your presentation and present it to my upper supervisors, just on ideas of how to deal with these different boards and how they can be organized. Because we actually about to make legislation right now to change these boards. So that's actually all I wanted to say.
Good comment. So Dr. Smith helped you out a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
And of course, Dr. Harris also has the board that evolved into the commission, evolved into institute.
Yeah.
So it's very good.
So I was a little bit more quiet on this one because while y'all was talking, I'm sitting there with a notepad writing notes down and thinking about other stuff. So I appreciate, I'm saying thank you for making me open my mind up to new ideas. This session was kind of actually at the perfect time.
Well, that's the purpose of our research. A larger purpose of our research is to ensure that we inform those that need that information so we can make impact. If there are no more questions.
Let me just make one last comment. I think what I like, Dr. Harris, is the fact that some organizations, like the Forum, for example, considers themselves, and they don't have as, I don't think there's as many academicians as you have in COMPA. I may be, and so
you're correct.
And part of but part of feeling bad about that is the fact that, you know, we're dealing with real world problems, day-to-day stuff, and all that theoretical gobbledygook is not necessary. But I think what's happening in Milwaukee really supports the idea of the necessity of having both. And so, you know, just like I think the Forum, you know, which is a great organization, has heavy representation of practitioners, I do think that the COMPA needs to expand in terms of having more of those types in the organizations. But I think what's going on in Milwaukee, I like the idea that it makes me feel more comfortable about COMPA and also the role of research. So just want to add that in. That's
Thank you. And you keep saying Dr. Harris. Is really close in the future. Doc keeps pushing me and pushing me. And I think my work at the university has shown me the path. I already know the path. Just got to get this 4-year-old in kindergarten and I'm off and running.
Well, that's okay. Don't worry about it, because, you know, when I got my PhD, they still was calling me Mr. Amity. And of course, all of the white folks, they called him doctor, you know. And they even called the ones doctors that didn't have PhDs. Well, how'd you like that? So, you know, hey, look, you're not the first one, but hey, I just want to encourage you and Dr. Smith and Dr. Harris to just continue your academic pursuits. But I think what you're doing is really, really good. And I appreciate all of the presentations.
All right, with that comment, I don't think we can top that. Everyone, thank you for your participation today. I'm looking forward to the recording, and maybe we can disseminate the recording, but enjoy lunch. I think we have a few minutes before the next session. It was great meeting you all.
Nice meeting you too. Again.
Thank you, Dr.